There are nights in Scripture when a man loses everything he thought he had, not because God has abandoned him, but because God is hiding him. Before Joseph stood before Pharaoh, he was thrown into a pit. Before he wore authority in Egypt, he wore betrayal from his own brothers. Before he fed nations, he was sold for silver like something that no longer had a name. And the darkest part of his story is not simply that strangers hurt him. It is that his own blood did. Genesis does not introduce Joseph as a warrior, a king, or a prophet standing on a mountain. It introduces him inside a broken family, surrounded by jealousy, silence, favoritism, anger, and dreams that nobody around him wanted to hear. His story asks one of the hardest questions a believer will ever face. What if the people who buried you were not strong enough to stop what God had spoken over you? What if the pit was real, the betrayal was real, the tears were real, but the ending had already been claimed by the hand of God? Tonight, we are entering the story of Joseph, not as a children's story, not as a colorful robe hanging on a classroom wall, but as one of the most devastating and beautiful pictures of providence in the book of Genesis. A son loved by his father, hated by his brothers, taken down into Egypt, forgotten in prison, raised in a single day, and finally brought face to face with the very men who tried to erase him. This is the story of the pit, the prison, the throne, and the God who was working in all of it. Joseph was 17 years old when the trouble became visible. Genesis 37 says he was tending the flock with his brothers, but he was not merely another brother among brothers. Jacob loved Joseph more than all his other sons, because Joseph was the son of his old age. And Jacob gave him a special garment. That garment was not just clothing, it was a message. Every time Joseph wore it, the house could see the wound. Every brother could see the preference. Every glance reminded them that their father's heart leaned toward one son, in a way it did not lean toward them. The Bible does not pretend this was healthy. It simply shows us the family as it was, a father with old griefs and favorites, sons with old resentments and sharp memories, a young man standing in the middle of a house that was already divided before he understood the depth of it. Then Joseph dreamed. In his first dream, the brothers were binding sheaves in the field, and Joseph's sheaf rose and stood upright while their sheaves gathered around and bowed down. His brothers understood the meaning immediately. They asked if he truly intended to reign over them. Their hatred grew. Then he dreamed again. This time the sun, the moon, and 11 stars bowed down to him. Even Jacob rebuked him, asking whether Joseph's father, mother, and brothers would really come and bow before him. But Genesis gives one quiet detail. His brothers envied him. His father kept the saying in mind. That sentence matters. Jacob did not understand everything. He did not approve of everything. But something in the dream remained with him. Something about it would not leave. Because when God gives a dream, the people around it may mock it, misunderstand it, or hate it. But they cannot destroy it. Joseph did not yet know the cost of those dreams. He did not know they would not carry him upward at first. They would carry him downward, down from his father's house, down into the hands of violent men, down into a pit, down into Egypt, down into slavery, down into prison, but the dream came from God. And what comes from God does not die simply because men decide to bury it. One day Jacob sent Joseph to check on his brothers. It sounds like an ordinary errand. A father sends a son into the field. But in Scripture, some ordinary walks become dividing lines between one life and another. Joseph went looking for his brothers, and they saw him from a distance. Before he reached them, they conspired against him. They said, "Here comes the dreamer." That phrase was meant to cut him down. It was a nickname made of contempt. They no longer spoke of him as their brother. They spoke of him as a problem. They planned to kill him. Then they planned to throw him into a pit and say a wild animal had devoured him. Reuben tried to spare his life, intending to rescue him later, but the brothers still stripped Joseph of his garment and threw him into the pit. Genesis says the pit was empty. There was no water in it. The detail is simple but terrifying. A dry pit in the wilderness. No escape, no water, no justice, no father, no explanation. And while Joseph was in the pit, his brothers sat down to eat. That may be one of the coldest details in the story. The boy was below them, betrayed and helpless. And they ate. Sin does not always tremble after it does evil. Sometimes it sits down and has a meal. Then a caravan of Ishmaelites appeared, traveling toward Egypt with spices, balm, and myrrh. Judah suggested they sell Joseph instead of killing him. After all, he was their brother, their own flesh. So they sold him, 20 pieces of silver. The dreamer became merchandise. The beloved son became cargo. The one with the special garment was now carried away without it. Then the brothers took Joseph's garment, dipped it in the blood of a goat, and brought it to Jacob. They did not even say Joseph was dead. They let their father make the conclusion himself. Jacob recognized the garment and believed a wild animal had torn his son apart. He mourned. He refused to be comforted. He said he would go down to the grave grieving for his son. And all the while, Joseph was not dead. He was on the road to Egypt. The father thought the son was gone forever. The brothers thought the dream was finished. Joseph probably thought the story had become impossible to understand. But heaven had not lost sight of him. The pit was not the end. It was the first hidden step in a providence nobody in that family could yet see. Joseph arrived in Egypt as a slave. The son of Jacob became the property of a man named Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh. Everything familiar was gone. The language was different. The gods of Egypt were different. The clothes, customs, food, streets, houses, and voices were different. Joseph had been torn away from the land of promise and placed inside the house of a foreign master. Yet Genesis repeats a phrase that becomes the anchor of this chapter of his life. The Lord was with Joseph. That does not mean Joseph's circumstances were easy. It means Joseph was not alone inside them. God's presence did not keep him out of slavery. God's presence met him in slavery. And because the Lord was with him, Joseph became successful in the house of his Egyptian master. Potiphar saw that the Lord was with Joseph, and that everything Joseph did was being blessed. So Potiphar put Joseph in charge of his house. This is one of the quiet miracles of Joseph's story. He did not become faithful after the throne. He was faithful before anyone important knew his name. He worked with integrity in a place he never chose. He served well in a house that reminded him every day that he had been betrayed. That kind of faithfulness is not small. There are believers who are waiting for God to change their position before they obey Him in their present one. Joseph did not wait. He honored God when his life looked unfair. Then came temptation. Potiphar's wife set her eyes on Joseph and tried to seduce him. Joseph refused. He did not only say it would be wrong against Potiphar, he said it would be a great wickedness and a sin against God. That sentence reveals the center of Joseph's heart. Even in Egypt, even as a slave, even after betrayal, Joseph was still living before the face of God. He had every human excuse to become bitter, careless, or hidden, but he feared the Lord. Day after day, the temptation came. Day after day, he refused. Then one day she caught him by his garment. Joseph fled, leaving the garment in her hand. For the second time in his life, a garment was used to tell a lie about him. The first garment was dipped in blood to make Jacob believe Joseph was dead. The second garment was held up to make Potiphar believe Joseph was guilty. The innocent man was accused. The faithful servant was condemned, and Joseph was thrown into prison. It would be easy to think obedience had failed him. But obedience had not failed him. The story was still descending, and God was still with him. The prison was not a detour outside the plan of God. It was part of the road. Genesis says Joseph was placed where the king's prisoners were confined. But again, the text gives the same deep comfort. The Lord was with Joseph. In the house, the Lord was with him. In the prison, the Lord was with him. Not only when Joseph was promoted, not only when he was understood, not only when life made sense, the Lord was with him in the place of chains. Psalm 105 looks back on Joseph and says his feet were hurt with fetters, and his neck was put in iron until the word of the Lord tested him. That is a terrifying and holy thought. The dream was true, but the dream tested him before it lifted him. There are promises that do not remove the furnace. They carry you through it. In prison, Joseph again became trustworthy. The keeper of the prison put him in charge of the other prisoners, because the Lord was with him and gave him success. Then two men arrived. Pharaoh's cupbearer and Pharaoh's baker had offended their lord and were placed in custody. One night both men dreamed. When Joseph saw them in the morning, he noticed they were troubled. That detail reveals something beautiful. Joseph was suffering, yet he was still attentive to the suffering of others. He had his own unanswered questions, but he did not become blind to another man's sorrow. He asked them why their faces were sad. They told him they had dreamed, but there was no interpreter. Joseph answered with humility. Do not interpretations belong to God? Then he listened. The cupbearer's dream pointed to restoration. In 3 days, Pharaoh would lift up his head and restore him to his position. The baker's dream pointed to judgment. In 3 days, Pharaoh would lift up his head also, but in a terrible way. Joseph asked the cupbearer to remember him. He explained that he had been stolen from the land of the Hebrews and had done nothing to deserve the prison. Everything happened just as Joseph said. The cupbearer was restored. The baker was judged. And then comes another painful sentence. The chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. Forgotten by his brothers. Forgotten by the man he helped. Forgotten, it seemed, by everyone who could have opened a door. But Joseph was not forgotten by God. The silence of men is not the absence of God. The delay was not wasted. The cupbearer forgot Joseph for 2 full years, but heaven was waiting for Pharaoh to dream. After 2 full years, Pharaoh dreamed. He stood by the Nile and saw 7 healthy cows come up from the river. Then 7 ugly and thin cows came up after them and ate the healthy ones. Then he dreamed again. 7 full ears of grain grew on one stalk. After them came 7 thin ears, scorched by the east wind, and the thin ears swallowed the full ones. Pharaoh woke troubled. He called the magicians and wise men of Egypt, but none could interpret the dreams. Then the cupbearer remembered, not because he was noble, because God's hour had arrived. He told Pharaoh about a young Hebrew in prison who had interpreted his dream, and the baker's dream correctly. So Pharaoh sent for Joseph, and in one day everything changed. Joseph was taken from the pit of prison. He shaved, changed his clothes, and stood before the most powerful man in the land. Pharaoh told him he had heard Joseph could interpret dreams. Joseph did not seize the moment for himself. He said it was not in him. God would give Pharaoh an answer. The same faith he had in prison was the faith he carried into the palace. Joseph explained that Pharaoh's dreams were one message. 7 years of abundance were coming to Egypt, followed by 7 years of famine. The famine would be so severe that the abundance would be forgotten. Then Joseph gave counsel. A wise and discerning man should be appointed over Egypt. Grain should be gathered during the years of plenty, so the land would not perish during the famine. Pharaoh saw the Spirit of God in Joseph. He placed Joseph over his house and over all Egypt. Only the throne would be greater. Joseph was given Pharaoh's signet ring, fine linen, a gold chain, and authority over the land. The man who had once been stripped of his garment was clothed in honor. The slave became governor. The prisoner became the one who opened storehouses. The forgotten man became impossible to ignore. But we must not rush past the years between the dream and the throne. Joseph was 17 when he was sold. He was 30 when he stood before Pharaoh. 13 years of descent, 13 years of questions. 13 years where the dream looked less possible with every turn. But God was not late. He had been arranging more than Joseph's promotion. He had been arranging the preservation of many lives. The throne was not merely for Joseph. It was for the nations. It was for Egypt. It was for his brothers. It was for Jacob. And beyond Jacob, it was for the line through which God would continue his covenant promise. Joseph did not know all of that while he sat in the pit, but God knew. The famine came, just as God had revealed. The land suffered hunger, but in Egypt there was bread. And when Jacob heard there was grain in Egypt, he sent his sons to buy food. So the brothers who had sold Joseph began walking toward the very place where God had raised him. They did not know he was alive. They did not know he had authority. They did not know that every step toward Egypt was a step toward the brother they had tried to erase. When they arrived, they bowed before Joseph with their faces to the ground. The dream from years before was standing in front of them. But they did not recognize him. Joseph recognized them. Imagine that moment. Their faces were older, but he knew them. The voices, the shapes, the men who had eaten while he cried from the pit, the men who carried his blood-stained garment to their father, the men who sold him and went home. Now they were hungry. Now they were powerless. Now they were bowed before the one they betrayed. Joseph could have destroyed them. He had the authority. He had the evidence. He had the memory. But he did not act from revenge. He tested them. He spoke harshly and accused them of being spies. He asked about their family. They told him of their father and their younger brother, Benjamin. Joseph wanted to know something. Had they changed? Would they sacrifice another favored son to save themselves? Would they abandon Benjamin the way they had abandoned him? The tests that follow are not random cruelty. They bring buried sin into the light. Their conscience begins to wake. They say to one another that they are guilty concerning their brother, because they saw the distress of his soul when he begged them, and they would not listen. Joseph heard them. They did not know he understood, and he turned away and wept. This is one of the most human moments in Genesis. Joseph is powerful but not untouched. He is healed but not made of stone. Forgiveness does not mean the wounds were imaginary. Mercy does not mean the betrayal did not matter. Joseph wept because the pain was real. He wept because memory can return with a face. He wept because God was doing something deeper than a family reunion. God was bringing sin into confession, fear into repentance, and brothers into a place where the truth could finally stand uncovered. The story turns when Benjamin enters the scene. Benjamin was Joseph's full brother, the other son of Rachel. After losing Joseph, Jacob had clung to Benjamin with fear. To bring Benjamin down to Egypt felt impossible to Jacob. But the famine pressed hard. Eventually, Judah pledged himself for Benjamin's safety. That name matters. Judah had been the brother who suggested selling Joseph. Now Judah offers himself as a substitute. When the brothers returned to Egypt with Benjamin, Joseph was deeply moved. He saw his brother and hurried away to weep in private. Then came the final test. Joseph had his silver cup placed in Benjamin's sack. After the brothers left, they were pursued, searched, and the cup was found with Benjamin. The threat was clear. Benjamin would remain as a servant in Egypt. The brothers could go free. This was the moment Joseph needed to see. Would they leave the son their father loved? Would they return home with another story and another broken Jacob? Or had grace changed them? Judah stepped forward. He told Joseph about their father's soul being bound up with Benjamin's life. He described the grief that would crush Jacob if Benjamin did not return. Then Judah made the offer. Let me remain instead of the boy. Judah, the one who once sold a brother, now offered himself in the place of a brother. At that moment, Joseph could no longer control himself. He ordered everyone else to leave. Then he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard it, and he said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Is my father still alive? His brothers could not answer him. They were terrified. The dead man was alive. The slave was ruler. The hidden sin was standing in royal authority, but Joseph told them to come near. That invitation is astonishing. Come near to me. The ones who had pushed him away were invited close. He told them not to be distressed or angry with themselves, because they had sold him there. Then Joseph revealed the meaning they could not have seen. God sent me before you to preserve life. They had sold him, but God had sent him. This does not excuse their sin. It exposes something greater than their sin. Human evil was real. Divine providence was greater. They meant betrayal. God was working preservation. They meant death. God was preparing bread. They meant to end the dream. God was moving the dream toward its appointed hour. Years later, after Jacob died, Joseph's brothers feared that he would finally take revenge. They wondered if his mercy had only been for their father's sake, so they came before him and pleaded. Joseph wept again. Then he said one of the most important sentences in Genesis, "You meant evil against me, But God meant it for good. Not God used it as if he were surprised by it. Not God barely rescued something from it. God meant it. The brothers had intention. God had intention. Their intention was evil. God's intention was good. This is not a shallow comfort. It is not a way of pretending pain is painless. Joseph names the evil. He does not soften it. He does not call betrayal a blessing. He does not call slavery harmless. He does not call false accusation small. He looks at the wound honestly and still sees the hand of God above it. That is biblical providence. Not that evil is good, but that evil is never sovereign. The pit was real, but it was not sovereign. The prison was real, but it was not sovereign. The famine was real, but it was not sovereign. The hatred of men was real, but it was not sovereign. God was. And through Joseph, God kept many people alive. The family of Jacob was preserved. The covenant line continued. The promises given to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob did not collapse under famine, jealousy, or human sin. Joseph's story is not merely about personal success after suffering. It is about the faithfulness of God to his promise. And for Christians, the life of Joseph casts a shadow forward. Joseph is not Jesus, but his life points beyond itself. A beloved son rejected by his own, sold for silver, made to suffer though innocent, brought down low, raised up to save many lives. The bread of Egypt was opened through the one his brothers rejected. And in the fullness of time, another beloved son would come, rejected by his own, betrayed for silver, condemned though innocent, brought down into death, raised in glory. And through him, not only one family, but people from every nation are offered life. Joseph could forgive because God was working through his suffering. Christ forgives because he bore sin itself. Joseph opened storehouses of grain. Christ gives the bread of life. Joseph's brothers came hungry and afraid. Sinners come to Christ with nothing but need, and the mercy of God is greater than the sin that brought them there. Maybe you are listening to this from a place that feels like Joseph's pit. You did not choose it. You did not deserve all of it. You cannot explain why people did what they did, and the dream of your life feels buried under silence. The story of Joseph does not promise that every wound will be explained quickly. It does not promise that the people who hurt you will understand tomorrow. It does not promise that the prison door will open on your schedule, but it does tell you this: the Lord sees. The Lord is with his people in places they never wanted to be, and the Lord can work in years that look wasted. Joseph could not see the throne from the pit. He could not see Pharaoh from the prison. He could not see the family preserved while he was being forgotten. But God was writing through every chapter. The call of this story is not to worship Joseph's resilience. It is to trust Joseph's God, the God who keeps his promises, the God who rules over famine and kingdoms, the God who sees the forgotten prisoner, the God who can turn the road of betrayal into the road of preservation. And above all, the God who gave his Son, Jesus Christ, so that sinners could be forgiven, reconciled, and brought near. The pit was not the end for Joseph. The grave was not the end for Christ. And for those who belong to him, suffering will not have the final word. If this message spoke to you, subscribe to Bible After Midnight. It helps us continue the work of bringing the Word of God with reverence, depth, and truth. And tonight, remember this: what men meant for evil, God was never too weak to rule. The story was not over when Joseph went down. And your story is not hidden from the eyes of God.